Welcome, everyone. Episode 3, A Nutter Perspective. I'm your host, Christen Nutter. I am so glad you're here. I've got a great lineup for us in the coming days. I don't even know how to tell you to get ready. Y'all don't even know. You don't even know what is coming. Gird your loins, maybe. It's the best I can do, but it's going to be great. And today, in preparation for these future conversations, I just want to keep on the topic of how do we come to know? How do we come to know specifically God, this being? If God is even real, presupposing that God is real, is he knowable? He, she, it, we, they. Is this God knowable? Does this God, this being, desire relationship with us? It was interesting. I was having coffee with a friend who would have considered himself a Christian and has since deconstructed. For those who don't know what the word deconstructed means, it refers to someone who once held a specific belief, usually talking about Christianity, and then kind of saw their beliefs crumble through various means. People deconstruct for all kinds of reasons. Maybe they were disillusioned by the church. Maybe they read more of the Bible and didn't like what they saw. Maybe they had a crisis of faith of some kind. Maybe they were raised in a type of Christian household that really turned them off and just chose to go the other direction. There's a lot of reasons that people deconstruct, and that's not even really what we're talking about here, but I was having coffee with this friend. We weren't even discussing justification for God necessarily, but we did go back and forth a little bit about how he got where he got, how I got or stayed where I stayed. And one of the sentences that came out of my mouth, I wasn't even expecting it, but it just sort of popped out, was, but I know him. I know him. I know him. And so the idea of walking away from or abandoning a God that I know felt inconceivable to me, as inconceivable as walking away from a dear friend, which has happened to me. I've gone through friend divorces. I've gone through broken relationships. And so I have a category for even when one has a relationship with God, perhaps they could walk away from it. Though I have a hard time conceptualizing that when someone really knows the God that I know, I'm like, how could you not but turn your life over to him? And that sounds like, I know how that probably sounds to someone who's not a Christian or to someone who would say they have not experienced God. And so that's where I want to sit in the tension of it, is share my experience while knowing that my experience is not a reason for someone else to believe or agree. I told you last time in our last podcast about how I arrived and assented to Christianity as the best explanation that I had come across for why things are the way they are. And the purpose of this podcast isn't even really to convince you. The purpose of this podcast is for all of us to have and engage in honest conversations about reality as much as we can, because we all want to get closer and closer in proximity to that which is real. Last time in podcast number 2, I shared the intellectual journey that I went on to kind of root out different worldviews and different perspectives that seemed inconsistent rationally, logically, etc. That, however, is not where the story stopped, because as I pressed in, as I continued onward, what was an intellectual assent became a personal, experiential relationship. And I have this working theory, and I'm not going to say that this is true. I just have this working theory, and I want to massage it. I'm tossing it out there for you to think about and engage with and give me feedback on. Here's what I wonder. I wonder if there is a difference between people who would say they have encountered God and people who would say they have not, even if they believe in him, even if they commit to or agree with or believe in all the XYZ tenets that make someone saved, or XYZ tenets that make someone a Christian or whatever, or maybe they don't. And so the question is is there a difference between someone who would say they have an encounter with God and someone who could not say that? I'm just curious. And I want to acknowledge there are so many different types of encounters. Encounters are super subjective. unverifiable outside of multiple witnesses experiencing it. Even in my own experience of encountering God, I see that as a case study that isn't meant to convert. It's not meant to be a proof of God. When you string enough case studies together, that's where you actually get interesting information. And that's not what we're doing today. I'm just sharing my story and my one little case study that I'm submitting into the ether for consideration, just to give you a window into how my brain works. I'm like, but there are people who have all these experiences in different religions that I don't want to discount either. There's case studies all across. And so, yeah, I want to share what my experience was like coming in contact with what I believe to be the God of the universe and the person that I know. Where I left off in the story in my last podcast is that I'd met a boy in high school and we fell for each other and we were so cute together. And he was a different faith than me. And that prompted me to go on this faith journey of exploring different religions, different ways of thinking, different worldviews to really assess, is this person worth giving up for the worldview that I claim to believe? Or should I relinquish my worldview and open my mind to different possibilities so that I can be with this person? Maybe not even so that I can be with this person. Who knows if it would have worked out? But really, it just sent me on a journey to explore different perspectives. It was a valuable journey, and I ended up landing back at Christianity after really going on what I think was my best shot as a fair search. And then I graduated high school. And anytime someone graduates high school, it's this massive milestone. And I really do think that whenever we hit these transition points, it causes us to reflect and assess, whether that's birthdays or New Year's Eve, graduations or marriage, kids, etc. Any big transition is just like an opportunity for you to ask, what was my life about before? What will my life be about from here on? What will change about my life now that I've hit this milestone, if anything? And obviously, I'd gone through that journey, that search. I landed where I landed, but it still cost me something. And right before Wheaton, I went on this trip called High Road, 2.5-week trek through the wilderness, freshman year. And so it was me and like 10 other girls. Honestly, it was the worst. I mean, we're just like trekking through the wilderness and canoeing and hormones and hunger. And we got poison ivy. I had blisters the size of quarters. And my arm swelled up like the size of a football. And I had to carry it through the forest. And my hand was like taking a doctor's glove and blowing into it. So I couldn't journal. And on the last days of this trek, they strung us all out on the coast of Lake Superior in Michigan, one of the Great Lakes. And we were stuck on the beach for 2 days. And I couldn't process my thoughts through writing. So I put my bathing suit on so I could get an even tan and just paced the beach, pissed at God that it cost me something, that he was expensive. I just was mad. I was mad. And for the first time in my life, I was mad at him. And I directed my anger toward a being for being expensive. I was very frustrated and annoyed that I couldn't have what I wanted, that I couldn't have both. We spent those 2 days duking it out. I just like poured my soul out to him and cried out to him and asked all the hard questions to him. It's not like I heard an audible voice. It's not like he responded to my cries with something tangible or in meaning. At the same time, I was deeply aware in that moment that I was speaking to a being. That was my first transition into seeing God as one that I could have a relationship with. And I experienced things like worship differently. It was directed to a person. I experienced reading the Bible differently. It was about a person. I experienced talking about him differently. I was talking about a friend. Prayer was different. It was all just more personal, more intimate. And then I met Luke, who would become my fiance and eventual ex-fiance. That was my first relationship with someone who was a Christian. And back in those days in purity culture, which I'm very happy to unpack here, it was just assumed that dating was for the purpose of marriage. And one of the sort of natural conclusions, even though this was erroneous, was assuming that if I'm dating this person, it's probably going to lead to marriage. as opposed to being like, oh, I can date and learn about this person and explore and see if it's a good match. And if not, we just move on. But in purity culture, it just seemed like if you were dating for the intention of marriage. And so it became almost this foregone conclusion that that's where it would lead. So dated Luke, got engaged to Luke. And in the process of that relationship, we were so young, like 20 and 21, infants, like babies, didn't know how to be in a relationship, didn't know what we were doing, had no business making massive commitments. We didn't know what we were doing, didn't know how to be good boyfriend, girlfriend, didn't know how to be good fiancés. That includes me, and that goes for him too. And there's obviously a lot more to the story, but what I ended up doing, how I ended up responding in that relationship was I changed myself. It's a common age-old narrative. Something's not working in this relationship. The other person's not satisfied. I want that person to be pleased with me. I want that person to want me. I want that person to feel connected to me. So I rationalize, well, in order to do that, I've got to change. I've got to be different. And I did. I became kind of this ingrown person. I turned in on myself. I withdrew from any kind of social spotlight. I minimized my gifts. I minimized my personality in a lot of ways. And so when Luke and I broke up, I experienced that break as a death. It was my first time realizing that you could lose someone who's still alive and they're dead. But I had taken this class at Wheaton about grief. I'd never really experienced grief. I'd gone through sad things, but I hadn't experienced personal loss to that extent before. So I just studied the idea of it theoretically. And I took from that class that if you don't grieve well, it finds a way out of you in unproductive and unhealthy ways. If you really want to move through grief and get to the other side, you have to go straight in. That was one of the best gifts that I had ever been given, was the wisdom that came from that class, because most 21-year-olds don't know that. And you learn that later. And someone had given me that resource, that tool of knowledge to know if I really want to work through this, I'm going to have to stare it in the face. And so I stared grief, loss, brokenheartedness in the face, and I allowed myself to be exactly where I was at and not rush through the process. And in my grief, in my most broken, lowest state, in the darkest places, I heard not an audible voice, but I experienced God speaking over me. Hey, I I kind of like how I made you. Like I made you for a reason. I designed you with an intention. I gave you the personality that you have with a plan and a purpose. So could you maybe not? Can you just not? And it was fascinating because it was so obvious to me in that moment that that was coming from the author of my life, the one who made me, designed me, knew me, and formed my inward being in my mother's womb. And he was making a statement about my identity, period. Like as if there was no argument. There's no other way of seeing it. This is how it is. This is who you are. And it was as if my whole life had been the pulling back of a slingshot. And in that moment, he let go. And I was never the same. Truly. I mean, if you want to know where my confidence comes from, it's from that moment when my identity was set. It no longer mattered what any human being thought about me. Who I was written in stone. It was set. What God thought about me trumped everything else. I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to be someone that I wasn't. I didn't have to please humans anymore. Like if they weren't pleased with me, but God was pleased with me, great. Now, if I'm doing something stupid and humans aren't pleased with me and God's like, all right, well, rein it in, bring it back. Like that's different. If I'm walking in the person that I am designed and made to be and honoring God in that, there is no conversation. There is no question. It is done. So take me or leave me. I don't really care. Cancel me. It's fine. None of that matters. And I personally think that is the legitimate invitation of the God of the universe on your life, is to be welcomed into that awareness to where your identity is fixed. It's done. Now, when I go into this quiet, intimate place with God now, it's so easy. It's so easy for me to get to that place where it's just like everything is laid bare. There's no barrier between me and Him. I don't feel any hesitation just bringing my whole self to Him and just sitting in His presence with Him, enjoying this holy space together. And the difficulty is I cannot transfer that experience to another human being. My experience of God in that way is not something that you can appropriate for yourself. That is an encounter with the living God that only you can have or not have. And that's where my challenge comes from internally. I have friends who are like, I've cried out to God. I've asked Him to reveal Himself to me. And I don't have an explanation because I don't know what their cries are like. I don't know who they're talking to. I don't know what they're expecting or wanting, or if that God has revealed Himself to them in ways they've ignored or is being silent. And I don't know what it means when people have experiences in other faiths that resemble mine and seem to be real. I don't have an explanation for that. How do I know my experience with God was any more or less valid than someone else's experience with a higher power or being? These are important questions that I can't answer just based on that experience alone. And here's why I don't place all of my stock on that experience while also not throwing that experience completely out the door. And the way that I bring these things together is this sort of Venn diagram convergence of multiple ways of approaching truth, reality. In isolation, experience and what my five senses, or six, if you talk about like your just like inner vibes, what my senses communicate to me is not the most reliable thing in the entire world. My eyes can play tricks on me. My ears can play tricks on me. I might go deaf. I might go blind. And even my feelings, my emotions aren't reliable. We can all relate to the fact that our feelings aren't meant to dictate our perception of reality. It's just a description of how we feel about our lived experience. So experience alone isn't enough. It's when you put experience as a circle into a Venn diagram of other ways of defining the credibility of our faith. So lived experience is one. Multiple case studies is part of that. You also add what I talked about last time, which is historical evidence, understanding the historical evidence for the resurrection of Christ, for the validity of the scriptures. And then you have the question of rational coherence. Two things can't be true at the same times that are mutually exclusive. So how do we bring reason and logic in compatibility with faith? Then we have something called the communal witness, which is millennia, centuries and centuries and centuries of people telling stories, testifying, and watching those testimonies and stories match one another. When you line them up, is there a thread of consistency in all of those stories and narratives and testimonies? And I think when you add all four of those together, you get within the center of the Venn diagram a credible faith. So me telling my story of how I come to know the living God is not meant to convert anybody. It is meant, however, to make the case that God's knowable. At the same time, if proof comes along that everything I experienced was entirely made up, completely psychologically driven, if there's something that can debunk my experience, I'm open to that being removed from the Venn diagram, because I want to get closer and closer in proximity to reality, and I don't fully trust all of my senses. That's also why I spend so much time and energy seeking to know and understand God as He's revealed Himself, so that when my lived experience doesn't line up with what He's revealed, I can question my experience more than I question reality. And in the midst of not trusting our experiences or letting our whole weight bear down on my personal experience, I would ask anyone who claims to have experienced God in negative ways to doubt those too. Let's all doubt our lived experience just enough to create the space for God as He is to reveal Himself to us the way that He wants to be known. Then that means I have to hold my idea of God with a grain of salt. And when I meet some information that forms my idea of God more fully, I need to be receptive to that. So thank you for joining me in the wondering and the curiosity of what does it mean to not just know about God, but to actually know the being that created us. If God's real, begs the question, does He want to be known? Is life better knowing God? Is life better having a relationship with your Creator, or is it better figuring life out on your own? These are questions that all of us should be asking. Perhaps there's answers. Let's discover them together. As I said, we've got so many amazing conversations coming up. I can't wait for you to meet these people and hear their stories and the way that their mind works. My mind works better because I know these people, and my heart is fuller because I know these people, and I think you'll experience the same. So tune in for our next episode of Another Perspective.